Okay, welcome back. So we've got a sort of base skin tone on everything here now, and I want to just paint out the claws and horns very quickly. Now I'm just going to put a base coat of colour on them so we can see what we're working with. So I'm going to go to UV, and I'm just going to pick sort of dirty bone colour here. So something like this should just about do it. And then I'm just going to take the paintbrush, and I'm actually going to paint this on a new level. So at the moment I've just painted you probably wouldn't have heard it, but I had the mouse down and I did some painting. Now if we go over to the colour, you'll be able to see what I painted. Don't need that. Control Shift C to clear the paint buffer and introduce a new level, a new layer, sorry, which we'll call bone. And then I just use my colour here and just paint over this UV patch, because I know this is all bone from pretty much when I organised it in Maya. And this is another nice reason to organize the UV patches in Maya with different groups of stuff on them. So I can just come in and paint this. Now of course an easier way would just be to push S for select and select this entire patch, then go up to patches, fill and foreground, and that will just fill the whole lot. Now we know this is the inner eye, so we need to paint that back black. Just for now, there we go, and one here. And that should give us B to bake that black down, and that should give us just some sort of colour on our horns and sort of fingernail claws and foot claws. So we've got one patch selected that we can see here in the viewport, so push S and just click outside and that'll unselect the one patch. Okay, now we're in a situation where we've actually got paint on pretty much all of our dinosaur except the inside of the mouth, which we'll deal with right at the end. But right now, at least we've got some paint on everything. So as we look at this, the front colour here across the belly is a trifle bland, and with the back of the tail. Now I do like the fading effect and I do like the lightness of colour, but I'm not too happy with the texture. So I had a quick search around through some textures I've got, and I found some alligator skin, which we're going to use to just give this a little bit more texture on these lighter areas. Now if I just double click this to open up, you can see what it looks like. So it's a basic alligator skin pattern like you'd see on the underside of an alligator. So problem, it's the wrong colour, but that's not really going to be a huge issue for us. So let's create a new layer to start getting some texture on this guy. And I'm going to call this under skin texture, and I'll make sure I'm on this layer and make sure I'm on the color layer. I'm going to go into the UV. I could paint this directly on the character, but in this case it's easier to do here. And I'm just going to drop this in and then Control Shift and drag it to the right size. And I want it about that size, so Shift and click to move it, maybe a little smaller. Okay. So I think that will be about right. Now if you look here, I'm going to click semicolon, and that will allow me to repeat the image. So even if I'm not painting near it, I'm just painting a repeat of it. So just go ahead, and you don't have to be very careful, we're going to use a mask anyway. But just go ahead and paint out some red on there like that. So that should be the texture for the belly. Now B to bake that. We also want a texture for the tail, for the skin under the tail. So let's come in here, and I'm just going to press Control and mouse click to kind of drag this into position. And then I'm going to come in and just paint all the way down. Now we've got this texture on repeat, so it will just repeat endlessly. And then I'm going to move it to the other side, Shift click, Control click to rotate it, and I'm going to just paint that out too. Okay, now I'm not going to worry too much about the seams on the tail, as they're actually underneath the tail itself, so you will rarely see them. But let's go in to our ortho now and see what we've got. So we've got some texture on the tail, some texture on the belly, and I'll probably introduce a little texture on the feet as well. So back to UV. Okay, and the texture on the feet will be here. So let's grab this, move it this way, and I'll introduce slightly larger texture for the feet. So I'm just Control Shift and scaling, and then I come in and I'll just paint around these parts like so. Okay, bake it down, shift, move it up to the other leg, and just paint around here. You don't have to be careful with this at all, because we're going to mask it out anyway. So really don't spend too much time on it, just make sure you've covered up the white bits you want. And the underside of the feet, which are here, we'll just colour as well. Because when we animate this guy, or if you choose to animate this guy, you'll see the underside of the feet when he lifts his legs up, of course. So let's see what we've got in the ortho view now. I'm going to hit P for paintbrush, just so I get rid of that image. And yeah, our feet are looking pretty textured. Our belly, it's got some texture to it. And our muzzle is going to remain just a solid colour. So that's looking pretty good. But, you know, we went to all that trouble of all the toning and everything else, and this is not what you call excellent, as you can see. So we'll use the mask that we used to do our toning with. So if I click on Show Current Paint Layer Only, and then I look at one of these masks, so I've got this one, which would be fine, or this one, which is the mask for the purple colour. If I click onto the, here, it's the mask for the blue. And there would be our solid colour. So I'm going to use this mask here. So just right click and layer mask, copy, and then paste the layer mask into this skin texture. So layer mask, paste. Okay, and now if I click on the colour, and let's show everything. Okay, there we go. Now I've got blended in here a little bit. Alright, so I'm going to edit this mask by hand because I want some of that two-tone colour to come through here. So I'm going to make sure I'm on a black brush, and you'll see if I just paint out here, I can start to paint out the mask. Now obviously that was a bit too much. So let's go with a very low opacity, say 0.2, and I might use a bigger brush, so press R, increase radius, and just come in and paint down a little bit. And I'm just going to paint out more of an edge on this. There we go. B to bake it when you're done. I'm just going to kind of come across here and paint out any obvious seams like that one. There we go. And up here a little bit. Now this is going to be down to you, how much of this you paint out and how much you keep. I'm just going to rough it up a little bit to make it look a bit more organic. There we go, take a bit away here. And I'm not too worried about some of the blending on here because I am going to actually blur this mask out in a little bit like we've done before. So come on, let's take away some of this at the top of the foot here. And we'll change the colour in a second as well, so it will match the underneath layer a bit more. I'm just leaving it this red colour for now because it's easier to see as I paint. That's just come through. Got a rather hideous seam there, so just paint that out. There we go. Bake that down. Bake it down. And you'll see I'm not spending too much care and attention on this. If I was doing this off camera, I would obviously take a bit longer. I'm just gonna get a rough idea for now. Okay, and let's go along the tail maybe a little bit. So just kind of big brush strokes back here. Get rid of that seam up there a bit, bake it. And maybe a little bit here as well. There we go. Bake. Right, and that's pretty much all I'm going to do for now. I'm going to blur it out, so let's click on it, go to show only the mask, and you can see where I've painted and it's not very smooth, but we can fix that with filters, blur, Gaussian, and that puts a Gaussian blur across there, so I'm going to hit apply. That'll just help the blending along the edges a bit, and this might take 30 or so seconds, just give it some time. Okay, there we go. Let's go back to the color layer. Alright, that looks okay. Let's go back to show all layers, and there we go. Now one thing we do have to fix is this texture is looking pretty decent, and as in I like the actual lines going across, but I'm not 100% enthusiastic about the color. So let's change that. So under here I'm going to add a adjustment stack with a hue, saturation and value. Then I'm going to pop that open, and I'm just going to try and get this kind of warmish skin tone color back. Let's pin that. Make this a bit bigger so I can see what's going on. Okay, and let's get a hue more towards the brown, and then I can up the value a little bit, change the saturation state. There we go. So I get more of a color in keeping with what we originally had. Let's have a look at this little guy now. Alright, let's make sure we have our shader turned on. That's a bit better. Now I can see a bit better what's going on, and that's looking pretty decent. Now maybe this color on the muzzle is now too light to match this color here, but at least we've started to get some texture in there now. And this border edge here, which is looking a little a kind of higgledy-piggledy, will be a lot better once we introduce a bump on that. Same with the muzzle. When we introduce the bump map later on, that will appear to have more texture than it currently does. But this solid color, I'm not really liking. This is a bit too light, so once again we can just add an adjustment stack with hue, saturation and value. We'll probably do it. And let's pin this one and get rid of that old stack. Okay, so let's go for a slight hue shift here. Probably need to saturate that a bit more. There we go. Just a very subtle change really, and I'm going to make it a tad darker. Whoops. There we go. And I'm just going to get a color I'm happy with. So around there really. Just a case of adding a bit more saturation into it, so it was a bit more towards the brown of the stomach there. Okay, and that gives us some texture along the tail and across the belly. What we really need in order to start finishing this little guy off is to introduce the bump map to him, which will change the look of the thing again. We also need to tweak our shader a little bit. I might make the eyes a tad smaller. But for right now, I'm pretty happy with this basic look. And what I want to do before I introduce a bump map is I'm just going to come in with a paintbrush and paint out this mask a little more. I'm not going to do this on screen because it's going to be a fairly uninteresting process. But basically, I'm just going to come along, and let me just change that back to full color, and get this blending a bit better by using various different opacity brushes and just brushing out the mask a little bit to get a slightly better transition, which is not a difficult thing to do, but it is a little time consuming. Okay, so I'm going to do that now in between these parts, and when we come back we'll talk about making both a bump and a spec map for this little guy, and then of course we've got to do the inside of the mouth. So I hope you found something in here that was useful. You can obviously use a different color texture for here. We could even change this skin color if we wanted to, so we've got the base skin here. Whoops, I accidentally created a new layer. If we create a new adjustment stack and go for HSV again, hue, saturation, value, we can change the color of the base skin now. Because of the way we've laid this out on layers, obviously if I didn't like my original base skin color choice, I can come in now and make this guy whatever color I want. So I'm quite partial to a green, possibly somewhere around there, but again, as you've seen, it's fairly easy to change, so it is your choice. But I'm going to leave him sort of a green color for when I come back to work on him. Okay, so now you've got quite a lot of control anyways as to the color of the texture of this belly, the color of the texture of the mesh, the color of the two-tone information here that deals with our blending, and the color of the actual skin itself. All can be controlled by a HSV node in Mari. Alright, so I'm going to just do a little bit of painting on my masks and tidy up a little bit, and I'll be back in a second when we'll go into creating a bump map and a spec map for this guy. So I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next part. Cheers.